What family secret did you learn that totally shocked you? My mom married my stepfather in the mid-80s. My mom and dad have been divorced since my birth in the early 70s, so living primarily with my mom, she would of course go out on dates and eventually I would get the old boyfriend's introduction, which usually went well. With my soon-to-be stepfather, I always knew there was something a little off. Could never really pin down what it was, but he was just off, if ever so slightly. But hey, my mom really liked this guy, so I was in. Made my way through some awkward teenage years with him and off to college. Still, I felt like I was missing something from him. Then in 1997, my mom and stepdad divorced. Towards the end, he would grow very impatient, and I guess they would fight a lot. But I wasn't around to see it, as I had long since moved out and had my own life to lead in a different state. Didn't ever hear him come up much in conversation after that. Now fast forward to 2007, my mom unfortunately had cancer, and it was nearing the end of her life. I spent the last 2 weeks with her at her house, just talking and letting her know how much I loved her and what a great mom that she had been. For those that have never seen a loved one pass away from cancer, it's not very pleasant. They tend to get a little loopy and forgetful, and generally speaking aren't 109% with it. So sitting on the couch next to her on one of these days, she exclaims, "Well, I suppose I can tell you about your stepfather now." My eyes perked right up. I knew it. Something was off about him. Maybe he went AWOL from the army? Maybe he had a kid I didn't know about? She continued on, "Your stepfather was a gay star in the 70s. This I had not expected. After reading a lot of terrifying stories, this one turned out to be the most surprising one. Am I the only one who expected a plot twist like the stepfather is actually OP's biological father? Or that the stepfather is actually OP's mom remarrying her ex-husband? Not my family, but I thought I'd contribute. A friend turns 15 and she's told she's adopted. Turns out that both her parents died in a car crash when she was just a baby, and her uncle adopted her and raised her. Told her that both parents were dead. A year later, a man messages her on Facebook saying that he's her half-brother. Turns out the dad lived through the car crash and later remarried. Her adoptive parents were lying to her as they knew all along the dad just didn't want to keep her. That's the secret, so to speak. However, the story continues as her biological father wanted to meet her. She flies out to meet him, stays with him, and meets his wife and her half-siblings. Struggles with the idea of reconnecting with him because she both loathes and hates him. Loathes him for not wanting her and getting a new family, but loves him for wanting to make a difference in her life and reconnect. She takes the plunge anyway. 6 months later, he dies from lung cancer. Life's a cruel joke on her. That my mom is actually my grandma. My dad is my step-grandpa, and my sister, who is 13 years older than me, is my mom. And my biological dad was 21 when he got her pregnant. And I was conceived on a picnic table in a park. How did you forget this in the initial post? That my aunt wasn't born looking like that. When she was younger, some kids in the neighborhood ganged up on her and attacked her with a 2x4. I never knew, and once I found out, I just felt so sorry for her. I was never told what happened to the attackers. Have a cousin that has a full beard. Talking with my dad about him one day, my dad tells me how lucky the guy was to be alive. Years back, my cousin had the day off work and decided to pass his time fishing at the lake and walked into a huge drug deal. Guys beat the living crap out of him and left him for dead. Luckily, someone showed up shortly after they were finished beating him, or he would have died. Has the beard to hide a lot of the scarring. Wow, that's crazy. My coworker was telling me today about her brother that got carjacked by 4 guys. I guess he's pretty big, so he was able to defend himself. Then one of the guys came at him with a crowbar. Somehow, he was able to catch the crowbar while the guy was mid-swing. He then proceeded to beat the crap out of the 4 carjackers before they all ran away, leaving behind just one. The cops came and tried to victim blame the brother for getting carjacked. The carjacker that was left behind had a broken jaw and just looked terrible. The cops were trying to arrest her brother for assault. They wouldn't even listen or care that he had just been ganged up by 4 carjackers. It's like you can't win. You either get your ass kicked or get in trouble for defending yourself. My father had an affair with his brother's wife, so my cousin is also my brother. My cousin doesn't know though. Grandma let this slip whilst wasted. Oh, Grandma. Every time you wanted some info from Grandma, 2 glasses of Chardonnay would do the trick. Found a Salem witch in the family tree. Not really a secret, just forgotten. You should probably cut her down. Yeah, she must be really old by now. I am sure she is really uncomfortable. You might need to draw a diagram to understand this one. My dad was born when my grandma was 18 and my grandpa was 14. He never looked like his dad, and always thought his mom had an affair. For context, my dad's family is all Lebanese, but he is very fair-skinned, which was partially why he assumed it had been an affair. When his dad's father, my great-grandfather, was on his deathbed due to cancer, a relative confessed to my dad that his grandfather was actually the father. My dad had my stepmom take hair out of his real father's head and had it sent for DNA testing, which confirmed it. Yeah, a little morbid if you ask me. So basically, my grandma had an affair with a married man when she was 18, had 1, possibly 2 children with him, then married his son and had another 4 kids. So my dad's siblings are both his siblings and his nieces and nephews, and the man who raised him is actually his brother. Yeah, I don't talk to that side of the family anymore. Found out when I was 22, but apparently I had an older sister. She died very young due to a heart defect or something before I was born, but yeah, no one in my very large family ever let it slip the whole time. I only found out because my other 2 older sisters found a letter buried in a closet one day years ago, and they told me about it way after the fact. Never asked my parents about it. I can only imagine what kind of old wound that would dig up, and they don't need that. I just quietly visited the grave by myself once to leave a flower. It was a pretty unreal feeling. Wow, very interesting, and makes me sad that they felt that they had to keep something like that a secret. Must have brought up all sorts of feelings for you. Tough stuff. It's alright. I never knew her or got the chance to meet her. It was just super surreal, you know? I didn't know how to feel, really. Felt super bad for my parents, though. I don't even want to imagine what it's like to lose a child that young, so I felt it best not to ask and let them keep their peace. I did inherit the male version of her name, though, which was the female version of my grandpa's name, so reason that out however you like. Maybe an inverse sort of deal, but my family were apparently millionaires in the late 1800s. I guess they had always been very wealthy. But between that wealth and getting split up every generation and my family living on the run for many generations, all of that money was gone by the time I came around. The only thing left was a chunk of property in Mexico that is completely worthless aside from a small bit of money from it because there's a highway going through it. This is totally shocking to me because in my life my family has been quite poor, full-on redneck on top of that, and lots of issues with addiction. If automatic refrigeration hadn't come along, I'd be the ice king of New England right now. Instead, my grandfather worked 3 jobs just so he could retire in a mobile home park. I'm imagining a really cheesy supervillain who's trying to destroy all refrigerators because he feels they robbed him of his family's wealth, which led to his sister's death when she was 5 because they couldn't afford medical bills. My great-grandfather was a quiet kind of man and treasurer for his lost chapter of the Elks Lodge in Texas. He was attacked on his way home from an Elks Lodge meeting. He suffered amnesia and regained consciousness as a sailor on his way to Haiti. After landing, he lived in the country for a few months before getting into a bar brawl with a police officer and getting knocked out. He regained consciousness in jail with a newfound memory of who he was. He told this tale to a priest from jail who believed him and wanted to help. The priest wrote my great-grandmother and the American government and somehow convinced the Haitian government to let him return to America. He returned to my great-grandmother, had 2 children, and was a law-abiding citizen for the rest of his life. This story is so unbelievable that when my mother told it to me 6 months ago, I was convinced it was a hoax. She has documents, the letters from the priest and others, and testimonials from his friends that say this behavior was uncharacteristic. Sounds like a dissociative fugue. Not so much a family secret I learned, but when I learned our family secret wasn't so secret at all. Growing up, my grandparents would make popovers for every family gathering. For whatever reason, my parents told me that popovers were like a family secret recipe or something. Or maybe I was just a stupid kid and thought a secret recipe meant nobody else made that food at all. Anyway, fast forward about 20 years when my wife and I were at a restaurant and they had popovers on the menu. I wondered out loud how this restaurant knew our family secret recipe. My wife got confused and asked me to explain, whereupon I immediately realized how dumb I was. She will never let me forget that. Ha, amazing. Reminds me of the Nestle Toll House bit from Friends. My grandma inherited several $100,000 from her stepdad. The juicy part is that to this day, no one knows how he got it. No one even knew he had that kind of money until he died. Since I'm from the South, my guess is rum running or something like that, but we don't know and likely never will. He was actually the pop star known as Lorde. Nah, he was clearly D.B. Cooper. That great-grandpa was a decorated soldier who fought in the Indian Regiment of British troops in World War I. In reality, he was a cook who deserted after seeing men sent to attack machine guns with their bodies. He and a bunch of other noped out of there while stealing a bunch of supplies. This was corroborated by the other deserters that returned with him. Took them a few years to get from France to Vadodara in the current state of Gujarat, India. They sold the guns and rations along the way for money, and great-grandpa picked up an STD from an Iraqi woman. Lucky Grandpa was born before he left. They blamed the STD on why he went funny in the head towards his end. Also, the little bit of money he brought back from the stolen and sold army gear helped my grandpa buy some land and kickstart my family's fortunes so that we could move out of the untouchable class. Crazy. I found out very recently that my maiden name, and subsequently the rest of my family's name, was supposed to be completely different, but was changed by deed poll when my grandfather was 11 by his stepfather. So before my father, we aren't actually related to anyone with this surname. It means nothing to our heritage or whatever. Kind of the same for me. Way long ago, England broke up many of the Scottish clans and gave them last names of colors instead. So our Scottish clan name isn't used anymore, and my Scottish clan relations can be any color name. And just because someone of Scottish descent has my last name, doesn't mean that we're part of the same clan. On the plus side, everyone knows how to spell my last name. My family changed their German last name to an English one during World War I, due to the strong anti-Teutonic sentiment in the US. Strange how immigrant hatred never leaves, it just changes targets. I was adopted by the man I always knew as Dad. I was always asked, did you think of him differently after you found out? My response has always been and always will be yes. I respect him a hell of a lot more than I ever did before. How old were you when you found out? It was my sophomore year of high school, so about 14 or 15. It definitely hurt at first just for the sheer confusion of everything. So ever since I started living in apartments for myself, I've had these big pink towels, and every time someone brought it up, I've told this story. When I got the first apartment, I went to visit my grandparents with my mom so that we could raid her basement for stuff that she had lying around that I could use in my new home. And among the stuff that we found were these giant boxes of big pink towels and jasmine incense. Now the towels I didn't question, but my grandparents didn't seem like the type to use incense, let alone in bulk, so I asked about it. And when I did, my mom and my grandma shared a look, and one said to the other, I guess he's old enough to know. So the story goes that my grandpa, amongst other things, ran 2 shopping centers. At one point, one of these shopping centers had a massage parlor. They seemed alright and always paid their rent. Then one day, my grandpa gets a call that eyewitness accounts went something like this. Hello, yes, this is... Yes? What? A whorehouse? What do you mean I'm running a whorehouse? Apparently, this was a full-service massage parlor, and the owner split once the cops got wind of it, leaving behind the whole operation. So my grandpa technically became the owner of a very large supply of pink towels, jasmine incense, baby oil, and tissues, and never one to throw things away. He kept it all in his basement, and they were pretty good towels, so I took a bunch and some of the jasmine incense. I may call them for more at some point. Those towels have seen some things. You probably want to run them through a hot cycle before you use them. I'll submit one because I think it's totally nuts, but it wasn't my family's secret. The family that I've known my whole life lived across the street. The daughter of the family married a cousin of mine, etc. Learned just a couple of years ago that the dad of the family didn't go away to the Peace Corps for those years he was gone in the 80s when we were kids. He was in prison for trying to rob a bank because the family hit such hard times when their second kid was born. The dad is the sweetest person ever, and we never doubted for a second that he would do something like joining the Peace Corps, that kind of guy. But the prison thing was a real what the heck moment for everyone. Ages ago, I arranged a meeting with a local dope dealer through a real half-assed friend, and surprise, surprise, it was my dad. Needless to say, major questions were asked on both sides. My God, the look on our faces must have been priceless. Maybe not me as much, but I got really into my ancestry, especially focusing on my grandpa because he straight up disappeared in odd circumstances after he got really sick when he was working for the Navy, and there was no documentation. Anyway, I get way into it, and someone was looking for him too. Compared details, and it was 100% my grandpa's daughter looking for him too. She had gone through foster care, but learned details about her dad and was searching for her family. It was really weird going to my dad and telling him he had a sister. We still aren't sure why they gave her up, but she was born almost exactly when my grandfather died, and my grandma remarried, so we think that had something to do with the decision. Still so many unanswered questions, but we still talk and do our best to research. Maybe we'll find more answers sometime. I have an aunt who's really very sweet and mild-mannered. She's very quiet and reserved, but pleasant and always well-behaved. Just around when I was born, ran away with her boyfriend, now my uncle, to get married, just in spite of my grandparents. They had a private wedding by the ocean. It was just the two of them and a pastor. She didn't tell my grandparents for months. She finally went to their house for lunch after not speaking to them or anyone for a few weeks. Just before she left, she attached a note to the refrigerator that, in my dad's words, gave them a heads up. My aunt and uncle still come for birthdays, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, but we are forbidden from discussing the scandal. When I was around 40, my mom told me I had an older sister who I'd never met. I never did get around to meeting her as she died before I was able to make the trip back from Australia to England. Did it take her 40 years to tell you? Yep. The real reason my uncle wasn't able to make it to my parents' wedding was that he was in prison. He had an excellent idea to rob a convenience store by yelling at the cashier and throwing bananas at him. After stealing $8, he walked 3 doors down to a Chinese restaurant and sat down to eat. Since it was winter, the cops just followed his tracks apparently. In order to lighten the mood, I'd like to offer a more funny secret. My grandmother died 8 years before my grandfather. When he died, we were cleaning out his house when it turned out my grandmother had owned a bong. I later found out it was from when she had cancer and wanted to try medical marijuana, but I initially thought it was when she and her sisters were younger. I confronted her sister, my great aunt, about it at a family thing later on, and this was her response. "What? No, we never did that. We just drank a lot." I love my great aunt. Her and my great uncle have taken it upon themselves to act as grandparents to us since my grandfather died. I mean, we were always pretty close to them anyway. Hell, their daughter is my godmother. When my grandfather was emigrating from Russia to Canada with his family, he sent my grandmother and 6 of his 7 kids first, one day before he left. The following day, he brought my father with him. He registered a slightly different spelling of our last name and was given a tract of land in Saskatchewan. My grandmother was also given a tract, but since they had registered 2 names together, they had 2 different pieces of land. He never told her about that second tract. Years pass and his alcoholism forced them into poverty, but he never sells the land or tells anyone. He recovers from his alcoholic nature and eventually dies from a heart attack at 63 years old. He left the land title in his will, now worth a substantial amount more. My grandmother was able to retire comfortably, and upon her death almost 15 years later, she left all of her children $10,000 each in cash. All the grandchildren $1,000, 24 grandchildren, and $2,000 to the 8 great-grandchildren. All the money was locked away and would mature when we turned 18. The great-grandchildren are set to inherit a nice college starter pack. I have a brother from another mother. When my parents were young, they were one of those couples who would constantly break up and get back together. Once, when they were broken up, my dad got another woman pregnant. The baby was given up for close adoption. All I know is that I have a half-brother somewhere out there 10 years my senior. Grandma didn't go away to fat camp. She was in prison. First off, my brother and I are both adopted from different families, so we have half-siblings we don't know. This isn't a secret. The secret is when I was 20, I found out my dad had gotten a girl pregnant, and her dad told him he'd destroy my dad's life if they ever saw each other again. My dad promptly joined the Navy and left. When he got back, she and her family were gone. This was almost 50 years ago, and he has no idea if she had the child or not. I have 3 to 4 half-siblings I've never met. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story to share, please feel free to do so in the comments section below. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you haven't done so yet. For more videos just like this one, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.